All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Tonight, we're going to do a Q&A with a Moon Prep counselor. Before we jump into the content and kind of walk a little bit about BSMD programs and the process of applying, I'll give you a little background on our company. Moon Prep is a consulting company that provides one-on-one college counseling services. We guide students throughout the entire application process, including writing a memorable personal statement, interview prep, resume building, kind of everything from A to Z. A lot of our work that we'll do and some of the things that we'll talk about today is what we do with our younger students, especially helping with course selection, applying to competitive summer programs and summer camps, job shadowing positions, internships, research opportunities, a lot of different things. And while we do work with a variety of students, many of our students are pursuing either Ivy Leagues, competitive universities, and or direct medical programs, also called BSMD or BSDO. You can definitely find out more information about our services we offer at moonprep.com. And so a lot of what our job is to help and guide you throughout this, kind of challenging and crazy application process. So a little bit more about me. As I mentioned, my name is Lindsay. I am one of the lead counselors at Moon Prep. Been with the company for about 5 years now. I think my specialties are helping students build a BSMD college list and personal statement. So my background is that I graduated from college with a degree in journalism, worked as a writer for quite a few years, and actually came to Moon Prep originally to kind of do a lot of the writing that for our books and Forbes articles and things like that. And that kind of evolved into me taking on more of a counseling role. And so now I'm a full-fledged counselor at Moon Prep and spend a lot of my time working one-on-one with students, as well as, helping students build their college lists, giving them advice about how to build their resumes and all that kind of fun stuff. And we do work with kids all over the country in every single time zone. And so I have helped kids, and the company in general has helped kids all over the country get accepted to BSMD programs. And so some of my top BSMD programs include Drexel, Penn State, the Albany Medical College programs, New Jersey medical programs, as well as honestly dozens of more. And so definitely here to help share my expertise and guide you throughout this process. So a little bit more information about us, about why us, why you should be listening to our advice. The first, and I think the biggest reason, is that we are definitely BSMD experts here. 90% of our students are pursuing BSMD or direct medical programs. I don't think there's another company out there that works with as many BSMD candidates as us. So it's definitely our exclusive focus and our expertise. And so, as a company, as I mentioned before, we are helping kids all over the country applying and getting accepted to these programs. And so we'd be more than happy and excited to help you and your student, guide you throughout this process. Another big way too is we definitely know medicine. One of the things that I always tell students is that there's no one right path to medicine. There's a lot of different paths we could take, which is what makes it so great, because we can follow your passions and your interests and, ultimately figure out a little bit about what makes you tick and, how to fill your time wisely. And last but not least, you'll be paired up with usually 1 to 2 members of our staff, an experienced team member, at honestly some of the best prices. So our lead counselors have worked as admissions officers, school counselors, SAT, ACT tutors, have been to medical school and graduated medical school. They're MD, PhD candidates. They've worked in a wide variety of different settings. And so we really try and bring those expertise to you to help you get multiple perspectives on your application too. So a little bit about the process of working with Moon Prep. I would say another way that we kind of stand out is we're pretty flexible in our pricing. We do have a retainer fee that you'll pay upfront to work with us, but that retainer, it doesn't expire and it is transferable. So, a lot of times we start working with kids freshman year, they might just need a few hours of help. Their freshman and sophomore year, junior year and senior year, it definitely ramps up. They can use those hours whenever and however they want. Because the nice thing is too, is that there's no limits on how hours are used. So we can honestly help with 5 schools or 50 schools. It really depends on whatever fits best, like what you're looking for. We can review a personal statement as many times as you need, review supplemental essays as many times as you might need, help with resumes, interview prep, scholarships, financial aid, summer programs, kind of everything. Anything related to the college application process, we can help with. And all the times too, you're paired up with a lead counselor as well as a mentor. Lead counselor is almost like the project manager, someone who's going to be able to give a lot of really pointed advice about the medical school BSMD application process. And then you'll have a mentor too, someone who has, who's going to be doing a lot of those essay edits and college application, nitty gritty work with you too. So a lot of times you'll have those two perspectives to help and guide you throughout that process. Now, we definitely do know a lot about BSMD, not just because we work a lot with BSMD students, but because we do a lot of research. So right before the start of the pandemic, we did write our first book, first edition on BSMD Programs, a comprehensive guide, which you can get on Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and more. We update this every single year just because things do change from year to year. Programs will come and go, application requirements might change. So we want to make sure ultimately that we're really helping to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information possible. One thing too that I would say is pretty unique about us is we try and interview as many different BSMD program directors as possible. So we've interviewed people paired with SUNY Upstate, with Albany Medical College, with New Jersey Medical College, a student at Brown's PLEME program, kind of all over the place. And so we really want to make sure that we do have a really strong understanding of the programs, what they're looking for in their students, if it's more community service or research or, a mixture of liberal arts and medicine actually. So it can really vary, and those interviews have really helped us understand a little bit better about what these programs and what these schools are kind of looking for. And so we'll use that expertise to help and guide you throughout this process and really make sure that you have a really strong understanding when you're building that BSMD list and helping you with those college applications to guide you throughout that process. And then one last thing too that we have a lot of information about is the interview process. So I'll talk a little bit about interviews and kind of the difference between traditional and BSMD, but the interview is definitely a huge way that it varies. And we realized that for BSMD students, there really wasn't a lot of information about the MMI, the multiple mini interview, which is an interview format that students might encounter. And so we put together this book, Moon Prep's Guide to MMI, where it has a ton of common scenarios, ton of interview questions that students might encounter to really help and guide them throughout that process. And so you could work with us just on interview prep. You could work with us throughout the whole entire application process. Once again, it's super customizable to whatever works best for you. The interview process is a really important step in the medical school, the BSMD direct medical application process, just because at that point, there's a lot of applicants that have been whittled down, just a few applicants are left now at this point. And so this is really your chance to really come alive off the page so that they can meet you and make sure that you're fitting the values of what they're looking for in a student. Interviews are really important. And so the MMI is a little bit intimidating to students at times. It's more of a traditional interview, it's not a traditional interview format because you'll have about 5 to 8 stations usually. It's almost like speed dating where each station you go to will have a different prompt that you'll have to answer, a different scenario. A lot of the times it will be ethical dilemmas that students will face, or, sometimes it is a traditional interview question as well. It just kind of depends based on the place and the question. So we help students prepare for that and, kind of run them through what to prepare, how to use that time wisely, and how to stand out ultimately throughout the application process. If you were to do interview prep with us, you can do as many sessions as you really need, which is I think, a huge advantage. You're not limited to just 1 or 2. Some students need much more. We usually do recommend that students do several with us because then they can really be prepared and be building on the skills that we've helped teach them. All right, but let's kind of get to the good stuff. I would say resume building is something that's probably on a lot of people's minds. Just because, grades are important, SAT, ACT score is important, But the resume is really where you'll shine. And so we help students a lot with building their resume. And so ultimately what we'll be doing, with our younger students is advising them a little bit about how they can be building their resume throughout this process. And there, I would say there's kind of, multiple paths that we'll take with students, as I mentioned at the top of this webinar, that there's no one right way to medicine. Something that a lot of those admissions officer interviews that we've done have been really explicit about. They don't want a cookie cutter applicant. They want someone who is following their interests, following their passions, ultimately really following what the student wants to be doing. And so that is, I would say, a huge part of what we'll do with our students is really make sure ultimately that they are following their interests and following their passions in both the medical-based experiences as well as, non-medical-based experiences. And so for non-medical-based experiences, these can be school clubs, these could be sports, these could be, volunteering. Not everything needs to be medical related, even if you are going for BSMD. And so what we'll work a lot with students on is passion projects. I'm going to talk a lot about that in this next slide, so I'm going to skip over it for now. But just know passion projects can be kind of a key aspect of the BSMD application process and resume building. But one thing that we really try and think about with our students in general is about like having an impact on your local community. If it's, through volunteering or through a passion project or, tutoring, whatever it might be, there's a lot of different ways that you can be having, a positive impact on your local community. But that being said, like if you really love ping pong and you're in the ping pong club, it's totally fine to be doing those things. It's fine to be playing tennis, even if you're never going to be playing tennis in college, even if you're just on like the JV team, for 3 out of the 4 years in high school, that's totally fine too. It's okay to be dedicating time to these activities as long as it ultimately brings you joy. That's going to be the most important thing is if you're not enjoying tennis, you don't have to keep doing tennis all 4 years just because. It's better to spend your energy wisely on things that you like to do. On the medical-based side of things, one of the things that we really do guide our students on is making sure that you understand what the role of medicine is. That's like a super key part of this, I would say, is, BSMD directors, admissions officers don't want to just know that you're interested in becoming a doctor. They want to make sure that you really do understand what the role of physician is and that you put yourself in different situations that allow you to kind of experience it one-on-one as much as you can as like a 16 to 18-year-old kid. And so there are kind of 3 ways I would say that students will do that through volunteering, like in a medical-based setting. That could be in a nursing home, as an EMT in some states, they'll allow you to do that, as a, volunteer, like at a private clinic, in a hospital, at hospice. It can honestly be even like, working I've had kids like work at camps with kids with like, disabilities or whatever it might be, working with someone in kind of that medical setting is perfect. And those can be really great because it kind of helps you get a small taste of helping others too in that setting, which is what we want. Now, shadowing physicians is also a really important component as well, because of course, that really lets you see the day-to-day interactions and the day-to-day lifestyle of a physician too. How much time they're spending with patients versus paperwork versus all these other little things that they have to be worrying about. How they're interacting with the patients, how their demeanor is, like how the patients react to them. All of these things are really important for students to see, outside of their own doctor visits. And so we do encourage students to shadow both MD and DO, allopathic and osteopathic physicians, because then it allows students to make sure that they understand too what the difference is and see which one is right for them. DO schools, like osteopathic medical schools, do like to see that you have an understanding of osteopathic medicine. So if that is like in your path, it's a good idea to pursue and to, do some shadowing of a physician as well. And then last, research is a really big thing that will help students with I'm going to talk quite a bit more about research in a few slides as well. But some of the ways that we help students find research, it could be with a science fair project. It could be with a like independent research project where you're writing a paper and getting that published, AP research, in seminar classes. It could be through like those summer research programs too. Those are definitely a possibility. So there are a ton of different ways you could be getting research. It could be like, you reaching out and finding a mentor on your own. That could definitely work too. So there are a lot of different opportunities to find research and can be a great way to ultimately stand out and, get some hands-on experience. Not every kid is interested in research. I would say that's one area that's kind of like some kids don't like research. Not every program really cares so much about research too, which is good. If you're one of those students who's not so interested in it, and so if you have it or don't have it, you're going to be on even playing fields either way, to be honest, for most programs. Volunteering is I would say, like, and shadowing can be really important, but honestly, like all of these things that I've just been talking about, nothing is ever like an absolute, like if you didn't have shadowing, you would never get in. One of our counselors at Moon Prep, her name is Nitty, she's in Brown's like PLME program, and she actually didn't have any traditional shadowing hours, but she had done a lot in the hospitals and kind of had a good understanding of what the role of physician was already. And so just through her other activities. And so it was okay. Like, not every box needs to be checked as long as you are checking boxes in general, if that makes sense. All right. So I kind of mentioned I was going to talk a little bit more about passion projects, and here we are. Passion projects are definitely something extra on your application. And they can be anything. There is not one passion project that you'll do that will get in. Even if like your friend did a passion project and they got into Penn or into Brown's PLME program or into, any other BSMD program, it doesn't mean that means that you're automatically going to get in, because there's so many different other elements to this process as well. So that's just one thing I want to preface by saying, doing the exact same things as someone else is not necessarily going to be your ticket in. In fact, I would say it almost would hurt you because maybe you're not passionate about those things. Passion is the most important thing, that you care about doing these things. And so I always tell kids that we want to try and turn interests into impact. And this can be anything. And so I've had kids, I'll kind of run through a couple examples of these 5 kind of examples that I gave here. But essentially, a passion project could be related to medicine, but it doesn't necessarily have to be related to medicine. So for my first one, I have one student who is a senior right now. I won't lie, she's an amazing student. She is really, really bright and really hardworking, and she dedicated years of her life to this passion project, and it has so many different layers. And so her story is that, she has an older sister who has autism. And so her life really was affected, in both positive and negative ways, of course, by her sister's autism. And so whenever she was younger, her mom always went to like town hall meetings to kind of advocate for her sister and make sure that she had, equal rights too. And as my students got older, she started to be the ones who would go to these meetings and start to speak out. And so as like, an 8th, 9th grader, she is already at these town hall meetings, advocating. A lot of her volunteer activities were related to people with special needs. So like she would volunteer like at the school that her sister was at, taught a lot with her sister, worked a lot with her sister. Like, a lot of her life was affected by this. And so as she got older, she definitely started to advocate more. So for example, they took away like arts and music from her sister's school, and she advocated to help get those put back in. She's been a speaker at conferences all across her state, and I think all across the country too. So she's become, really a source of knowledge here too. And she's actually introduced a new program at her local fire stations, because people with autism, a lot of times when they are in a different situation, they see someone they don't know, they might get scared and run away, like in an emergency essentially. And so, firefighters, she wanted to teach them how to respond, how you should be approaching people with special needs. And so that was like, big work that she's done. She's implemented it not only in her home state, but in, a couple other states as well. So it's been, I mean, honestly, pretty impactful and pretty influential. She's, I would say, like one of the highest caliber students I've worked with. But one more element I would say too that she did was she also like wrote a book kind of about her experiences too. So there was like so many different layers to her passion project, which is ultimately like what makes it so fantastic. Is if she wasn't passionate about this, there's no way she would have dedicated years of her life to this. There's no way she would have thought about doing all these things, sought out all these opportunities. And that's what makes her passion project so impactful, was it was so close to home and something that she really cared about. So that was definitely something that I think would be one of the top passion projects I've ever heard of, because it had so many different layers to it. But not everyone's going to have the time and the energy to do that. And that's totally fine. Like this girl, I think she did play some sports, but, it wasn't really like a huge bit of her time that she spent. I honestly don't know how she had time for everything, but she did dedicate a lot of it. Not everyone will have that opportunity, and that's okay. As long as you are adding layers and having a passion project, that's ultimately okay. So I would say like one that would definitely be like less intensive is writing a research paper. So we've definitely had kids who are writing research papers, who've gotten them published, who have like, done different areas of interest. And the nice thing about this is, doing research in a school, like, through a school program could be really great, but a lot of times you don't get to pick what your research topic is. Sometimes you do, but not always. When you're writing a research paper, you usually can pick your topic, as long as you find a mentor who can maybe help and guide you throughout that process, or you do it through school or whatever it might be. So it's, ultimately something that you're very interested in, and then getting it published. And so it could be, about a health condition you have, or, a family member has, or it could be something that, you see a lot in your day-to-day life. So for example, I had one student who wanted to be a dentist, and his paper was about like why, how smoking can increase dental fear. So we surveyed a lot of people and wrote up a research paper on that. I had one girl too, who like found out she had lead poisoning. And so did a little bit of detective work and figured out, where the lead poisoning came from. It had come from like actually like a commonly used spice. And so she wrote her research paper on that. Her and her mom came up with kind of like this homeopathic cure to get her lead levels back down to normal. And the research paper kind of encompassed all of those elements. Going back to what I was saying about layers, this lead poisoning girl was a really good example of how you can add layers to activities. So for her, her activity was about, the original paper was about lead poisoning, but because it was a commonly used spice, she actually did like a poster presentation, like her next community event, spreading awareness. Like if you have these symptoms, if you use this brand of spice, like maybe you should go get tested. And it turns out like 3 other kids in her neighborhood like also had lead poisoning. So she was able to have like a little bit of positive impact there. Like her sphere of influence was getting a little bit bigger. And then the next step that she actually did was she created an app, and entered it into Lenovo's app contest that they have each year, and actually won first prize in the health sciences category. And this app, once again, kind of did the same thing, spread awareness about lead poisoning, what to look out for, and things like that. Super simple things, but she added multiple layers to her activity and was able to gain new skills too, which is great. Like, so she proved that she could write and like think analytically. She, was showing that she was able to communicate too through her poster presentation. And last, created an app from scratch. So that's a whole nother skill too that could be translated, into the future into different activities as well, which is ultimately exactly what we want from our students. Now another example I've had of students before is like filing a medical patent, actually. So this one, I had a girl a few years ago now who, this was at like kind of the height of the pandemic. She and her friends came up with like this idea for a chair that could do like weight, height, blood pressure, kind of without people having to touch and interact with each other. And so they never actually created a prototype. They just had like a patent that they had filed. But this was something that once again kind of showed creativity and showed a lot of skills throughout this process, because this took a long time to put together and a lot of effort and a lot of moving pieces, obviously. And something that she talked a lot about her college applications too, about like, how she could, kind of take this idea and turn it into reality essentially. And so, it really showed who she was going to be in the future as well. I've already talked a little bit about writing and publishing a book. When I've had kids do it, teaching concepts, it could be a children's book, could be an autobiography, it could be a lot of different things that students could write about and ultimately get it published too. Once again, kind of showcasing different skills and guiding them throughout the process too. And then last, like, if you spent years of your life learning how to play the piano or the violin or whatever instrument it might be, you might think about releasing music on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever it might be. It's just a way to, once again, kind of add that layer to an activity that you spent hours, years of your life like doing, and it's just going to be a cool way to see how that happens as well. So that's a little bit about passion projects. They definitely don't need to be, as I mentioned, kind of at the top, they don't need to be medical related. You could really do whatever you're interested in. I guess one other non-medical one that I can think of off the top of my head, I had one student who loves tennis. So he was like a tennis on the varsity tennis team. He was one of the tennis captains as well. He was a coach for like a Special Olympics team, and kind of like buddied up with a kid there. But then when the pandemic hit, all those things kind of got canceled. The school team got canceled. The Special Olympics got shut down for a little bit. And so he was kind of like left with like not a lot of opportunities. And so what he did was he actually started like a small tennis club for women over the age of like 45 or something like that, who had never played tennis before. And so it was a way that, he could be teaching like 2 to 3 women at one time, keep it relatively safe but still find a way to be impacting his community in a positive way. And you wouldn't think that this activity would be like super influential, that he's learning so much from it, but it actually was something that we used a lot in his applications and kind of talked about quite a bit, because he was able to gain a lot of really valuable life skills. I think like gain the confidence to be able to speak to people who are a lot older than him, got a lot more life experience than him, but not nearly as much tennis experience. So he had to gain that confidence to be able to speak up and kind of advocate for himself and his knowledge. Because these women were much older than him, but were beginners. And so like, that's, I think, the most important thing to kind of remember is, these kind of things are able to showcase, these activities, these passion projects are able to showcase to the universities who you're going to be, which is what we want to be doing. We're able to get an idea of these students based on their activities, how they spend their time. These students are like, we're all go-getters who, wanted to create things, who saw problems and ultimately try to solve them, even if it was a work in progress, even if it was just like one small tiny corner of the passion or of the problem that they were fixing. It doesn't matter. Like, ultimately they were making a positive impact on their community. And so when we have interviewed admissions officers at BSMD programs, medical schools, summer programs, wherever it is, passion projects is a huge thing that they often talk about. Even if they're not necessarily using those words, they're talking about things that kids have started, even if it's something small, even if it's just like a one-time food drive that you're doing in your neighborhood. It doesn't matter what it is. We want to see impact, and we want to see things that you care about and ways that you can make a difference. So passion projects is a big thing that we'll spend with our students, especially over the summer, helping them, guide them throughout the process. Now, one question that got sent to us beforehand that I'm going to address now because it kind of makes sense in this moment. But one of the questions was about, do I need to start a nonprofit? And this is something that, ultimately we get asked a ton as moon prep counselors. Is it necessary? All of my friends have a nonprofit. I must have one too. Is that right? The answer is not really. A nonprofit could be really great, but you could have a really impactful organization. You could have, you don't even have to have like an official organization to have impact. Because ultimately, like a nonprofit, if it doesn't really do anything, that's pretty obvious. You won't have anything to say about it. You won't have anything to show about it. And who really cares if you started a nonprofit if you haven't done anything with it? So don't spend all your time like, setting up this nonprofit if you don't have an idea where you want to go afterwards. the end result is what's really important throughout this process. So a nonprofit can be really great, but it's much more important to spend your time, building up your activity list and building up, having really results to showcase to the BSMD or, traditional application, traditional admissions officers too. So just like my opinion about how important it is to do to do a nonprofit. Okay, so I mentioned a little bit about research. Research, as I mentioned, can be like a really important part of the process, and I would say some programs definitely do value research. And even if they don't, once again, it's about like what skills the research teaches us. Because obviously you're not going to be able to roll into a lab, as a 16-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid, and be able to do like super impactful work. A lot of times you are kind of starting at the bottom and doing the grunt work, and that's totally fine because that's an important part of this process. It's just kind of like shadowing, that's an important part of this process. You have to learn before you can really, walk before you run, essentially. And so ideally, what we want to have with research is you being able to learn some skills, or at least observe skills and understand what it will take to get to the next level. But that being said, I wanted to present to you one of our sister companies, Rising Researchers. This is kind of an exclusive partnership for high school students to develop a high-level research project. It's like a program where students can start it at any time that they want. It takes, there's 10 sessions over the course of about 4 months or so, 3 to 4 months, I would say. The huge benefit is that students get to pick their topic. So this is like a research program where, they get to work with a research mentor one-on-one and, on a topic of their choosing. And so ultimately, a lot of those research topics are going to be scientific in nature and geared towards students who are interested in BSMD or pre-med. And, it could be anything. It could be about autism. It could be about dementia. It could be about a skin condition that you've had since you were a child. It doesn't matter what it is, public health, dermatology in general, it could be anything. And so that's, I would say, like the big benefit is it comes down to passion. You can pick a topic you're passionate about and figure out, maybe if you can connect it to other activities, that's fantastic. If not, we can definitely work with you and guide with you on that process too. But you will be working, if you choose to do like a research opportunity like Rising Researchers, you could do you'll ultimately be writing like a research paper and getting that published too. So we'll help and guide you throughout that process. And so a little bit about the logistics is, you'll be paired up with a research mentor. This is like an MD, a DO, a PhD, MD candidate, or a medical school student. There's a lot of different, types of people you could be paired up with. But the one guarantee is that they do have a lot of publications to their name. They've presented at numerous, conferences. They have a lot of experience guiding students throughout this process. And so over the course of 10 sessions, they'll be helping you with a research topic, figuring out how to do research, do a review of papers, figure out how to analyze papers and, form your own conclusions, and then ultimately get that paper published too. And so this could be a really great research experience for students who are wanting to pursue a research opportunity, but don't know how to do it. And so this research is through Rising Researchers. Their website's www.risingresearchers.com. But you can definitely look into that and find out some more information about that. And, hopefully get started on some research experience. So if you're still looking for like research opportunities this summer, this opportunity has rolling applications. And so essentially how it works is, once they're filled up, but, at this point, they're still taking on more students. And like I said, it's a one-on-one kind of opportunity. So research is kind of, I would say, the one big element that we always will help students with and guide them throughout this process. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about essay writing, because this is something that come senior year, like the junior year, senior year summer is something that's like really influential to the application process. It's super time consuming, I won't lie. Most BSMD applicants are writing usually like 60 to 100 essays. and the topics will vary. Like you'll usually have to write not usually, you always will have to write a personal statement. That's a 650-word essay that's going to go to every single school on your list just about. It's like your introduction to the schools, your chance to display some personality. And then you'll also have like your supplemental essays. You'll have essays that you'll have to write to apply to the school, as well as the BSMD program. And so you might see things like tell us about an extracurricular activity, a diversity essay, why doctor essay, why this school essay, things like that. And so whenever you're working with us, you'll really work with us as like a skilled, we'll be there to guide you as skilled storytellers who will help you stand out from the admission staff. And so a lot of our work with you, especially starting your junior summer before your senior year, is going to be essays. We do use like an essay management system to track all your essays in one place to stay on track and moving forward. In this essay management system, each school is broken down with their essays written out, prompts, word count. We store all the essays in there, all the drafts in there. So it's really easy to see what draft we're working on, what needs to be done, where we can reuse potentially, and things like that. So it can make it really easy to be able to review all the prompts and, be able to divvy up the content. So we're making sure that we're really showcasing to the universities, who we are and why we should be the ones that are accepted speaking as a student. Now, we really do help students from the ground level up on this process. So we'll help them brainstorm ideas. We have a ton of brainstorming material. We have a ton of sample essays. We'll help them with, if they want, we can help them write an outline and, a roadmap almost to where the essays are going to go. Once the student has written the essays, we'll give feedback on it. Essay edits, comments, suggestions, really to make sure that the essay is as strong as possible. So we'll be doing that, throughout this process. And we can do that as many times as they need, go back and forth on drafts as many times as they need. And ultimately, we're not just making grammar edits. We are really helping to shape the story, give suggestions about how to reword things to make the student, language more positive, or, things that they should focus on instead, maybe new details they should be adding, a new direction completely, highlighting things that we want them to expand on and, add more details. So this process can really take quite a bit of time. Students will be writing a lot of essays. And so we really do encourage them to start with us early. So if you are like a rising senior, it is a good idea to start the summer before your senior year to really make sure that you do get a head start on that process and really, make sure that you feel as ready as possible once application season really hits. All right, so now just a little bit more logistics about working with us. I would say our freshmen, sophomores, and juniors typically meet with their counselors about once a month or as needed basis. They'll spend anywhere from like 5 to 15 hours with us a year. And I always say that this is really flexible. If over the summer you want to meet more frequently, like every 2 weeks because you're working on passion projects, or in January when you're applying to summer programs, you have a lot of essays, you want to meet every week, great. We can totally meet every single week. I always use like May as an example because May typically is AP season. And so a lot of students are studying in May and, not doing much else. That's totally fine. Like if you want to cancel your May meeting and meet again in June, we can make that happen too. So the once a month is really just a guideline to keep the students moving forward throughout the process. Now come senior year, this is, like I mentioned before, really when the work begins. You're typically with us you're typically meeting with us about once a week or as needed basis. Sometimes it's more frequently. It just depends on what you need. But you'll be with us for about 40 to 50 hours. Now, most BSMD seniors will typically apply to about 10 to 15 BSMD programs, 10 to 15 traditional. The reason being is BSMD is uber competitive. We want to make sure that we are 100% prepared, that we have a ton of options. A lot of these BSMD programs accept just, 5 to 10 students, 25 students. It's not a lot. And so we want to make sure ultimately that we really are guiding you throughout this process and helping you stand out as well. Now, we do keep the parent in the loop throughout the whole process. We usually do suggest that the parent comes to the first few meetings. Then once the student gets comfortable with us, then they tend to lift out, just because then we have a stronger relationship with the student. Essays tend to work a little bit better too. It ultimately comes down to whatever your family prefers. And then lastly, Moon Prep is 100% always your partner in this process. We do a lot of emails back and forth. We do a lot of Zoom calls with our students. We know kids are in school during the day, so we're free nights and weekends with them too, and can kind of work around the student schedule as well. All right, now just a little bit more about BSMD programs in general. One of the big questions that we got, because we had some questions that sent into us beforehand, was essentially like, why should I do BSMD over a traditional school? That's a great question, of course. The reason ultimately why for BSMD, I would say, comes down to a few reasons. Length is one. Some of these programs are accelerated. They'll be 6 to 7 years. Some, of course, are 8 years. But, it could save you a year or two of your life, and you can start practicing as a physician that much sooner. I would say another advantage too is actually your major choice. A lot of programs actually do allow students to pursue a Bachelor of Arts, which kind of seems counterproductive. And actually one of the questions that we got sent in before was, that BSMD actually makes you almost makes you lose out on the traditional school aspect. That the college experience, I guess I should say. I would actually say that that's really not true. For this reason is that, you really can do any major you want. You don't feel like you have to do biology if you don't really want to. I've had kids do journalism majors, political science majors, computer science majors in a BSMD program and get accepted. So it can honestly be whatever you're interested in. Another way that I would say that college experience really is preserved is these two on the bottom, the GPA and the MCAT. Every single BSMD program does have requirements that you have to hit to stay in the program, but they'll vary. Most of them will typically have a GPA requirement of 3.5, which is going to be lower than the average successful matriculant into medical school. Most of their GPAs will be 3.6, 3.7 or higher. So you are kind of at an advantage there. And then luckily, some BSMD programs don't require you to take the MCAT. You sometimes will have to take it, but not get a minimum score. Sometimes you do have to get a minimum score, but it's lower than what you would need to get into the program actually. If you were applying traditionally, sometimes you do have to match the score from the previous year's application class. It just will vary from place to place. So, we'll definitely read the fine print. But if you don't want to take the MCAT, that could be a whole summer and stress, kind of taken off your plate. Most kids will study for the MCAT for 2 to 3 months, about 8 hours a day, taking the day off, of course, but that's a lot of hours that they'll be spending on the MCAT. And so if you don't have to do that, don't have to stress about getting the highest score possible. Think about what you could do that summer. You could be doing a study abroad program. You could be doing a research experience. You could be volunteering. You could be, honestly doing anything you would want to do, but not having to take the MCAT. So that can be a huge advantage in a way that actually BSMD programs, don't make you lose that traditional college experience. Now, that being said, I would say the traditional college experience might be lost in some of the 6-year programs. You are going pretty aggressive. You are doing college in about 2.5 years before you're switching over to medical school. So it's just a lot. You're going to the summers, you really have to choose a biology major because you have to make sure you're fulfilling as many, don't have to fulfill as many requirements as possible. So, there is some programs I would say that you do kind of lose that college experience, but it's not a universal experience by far that it is going to be really intense and you have no room to do anything else. So BSMD programs, like everything else, they kind of don't take them just as equal. There are, I would say, different requirements and different benefits of being in a different program from program to program. However, I would say the absolute biggest benefit is a guaranteed seat in a medical school. Like we mentioned, there are going to be requirements you'll have to hit. but it's a lot less stressful. You at least know that there is a spot available. It's not like, you have a spot, you do all these things, but you still get rejected. Medical school is uber competitive. And so having this assurance can really hopefully make your life a little bit easier. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the differences between BSMD and traditional schools. So the big difference, I would say, between BSMD and traditional comes down to multiple factors: resume, number of applications, competitiveness, time commitment, and the interview process. Let's start at the top with resume. We do help kids, BSMD kids are also always applying to traditional schools too, whether or not it's 2 schools or 20 schools, it will kind of vary, but everyone is applying to a pre-med school, is what I mean by traditional, just a run-of-your-mill 4-year university. Now, to get into a traditional school, it depends, of course, on the caliber of the school, how competitive it is. A lot of our BSMD applicants who are getting to the most competitive programs are also able to get into Ivy Leagues because they are a top student. They have those passion projects, they have deep volunteering, they have leadership, they have all these different elements that, of course, a traditional school that's a top 20 or top 50 school is going to want to see. However, I would say BSMD programs in particular really want to see those medical-based activities. So that's going to be the biggest thing. Volunteering in a hospital, shadowing, and potentially research too. Those 3 things are going to be what they're really looking for, that deep understanding of the medical field. Whereas a traditional school maybe doesn't care about that, but they do want to see deep interest in things, but they don't necessarily care if it's medicine. So that's I would say an important part of the process is they both want to see deep interest in things, but for BSMD, they do want to see a deep interest and passion for medicine. And one thing too that we've heard from people that we've interviewed is that they want to see that passion really comes from them. I believe it was SUNY Upstate Medical School that talked about that. They don't want to see the passion of the parents. They want to make sure that the kid is the one that's really passionate about medicine. And so, those activities, those essays, the interview later on that we'll talk about, those really will be what's so important to being able to showcase. Now, the good news is volunteering in hospitals, doing research, having kind of these intense, the medical patent that I was telling you about before. Even for my student who was applying to traditional schools, all of those things were really valuable because it still showed deep interest in things, working with your community, thinking analytically, being able to write papers, whatever it might be, all those things were really important still to traditional schools. So let's say you go 3 years in high school, your freshman through junior year, thinking you're going to do BSMD. So you've done all these medical related things, but then change your mind, at the end of your summer because you discover computer science or whatever it is. That's okay. All your work is not going to be for nothing. There are so many more opportunities that you could totally be doing. And so, or so many good qualities that these activities are really showcasing about you. So you don't have to stress for BSMD versus traditional. They're still going to care about those things that you've done. I would say the number of applications and the competitiveness kind of go hand in hand because BSMD is uber competitive. For example, Case Western gets more than 3,000 applications and they've got 25 spots. It equals out to be a 0.04% acceptance rate or something crazy, 0.4 or 0.04. It's insane. I can't remember exactly how many zeros there are, but it is really hard to get into it. Brown gets 3,500 applicants. They have more spots. They have about 80 or so spots. It's a 2% acceptance rate. The SUNY Upstate schools, a lot of them will have 5 seats or 10 seats. Baylor has 6 seats. You get the picture. It's competitive. It's super competitive. And because of that, students are applying to a lot more programs. They'll usually do 10 to 15 BSMD programs to give themselves the best shot possible. And then, of course, they're also going to do their traditional schools. So they might be doing 10 to 15 of those too. So, a traditional student, of course, would just probably be doing anywhere from, 7 to 15 or so, I would say. But then our BSMD will be adding on those 10 to 15 BSMD as well. So it is a lot of applications, a lot of essays that they'll be writing, which kind of leads me into the fourth one, which is time commitment. Because you are writing more essays, because you are going to have to do interviews, which we'll talk about in a minute, because you are, having to build up your resume with all these different elements, it's a lot of time. Like I said, most of our students are working with us for 40 to 50 hours, but they're spending a lot more time on their own writing all those essays too. The good news is, they're not necessarily writing 70 to 100 unique essays. We do see a lot of repetition. And so, you could be having, if you apply to 10 BSMD programs, you likely are going to have to write 10 Why Doctor essays. The essay will probably be really similar. There might be like small little element changes you will have to, make a difference, or the character count, word count might be different, but the main meat of the essay will stay really similar. So that's the important thing to remember is it's not necessarily unique essays, but it still is a lot of essays that you have to be putting together, a lot of time spent applying and making sure you have, all these elements that you're going to need throughout this process. And the last kind of point I would say about the big difference is the interview process. So for traditional interviews, they'll have like alumni interviews for some schools that are, kind of optional. If you can't do it, it's okay. If, sometimes they can't offer it to every student, they try, but there just might not be possible. I would say that those are a little bit more of like a conversation, the alumni interviews, that is. Those are student interviews too, will sometimes happen. Those are a little bit more of a conversation. They'll be, not super influential to the process, decision-making process, to be honest, but it's just a good way for you to get a better understanding of the school more than anything else. Now that being said, BSMD interviews are super influential to the process. Some BSMD interviews will have multiple rounds. So they might do like an initial phone screening. Then they might have you interview with the traditional school. And then they might have you interview with the medical school. So it could be multiple interviews that you're having to do. For the BSMD interview process, it typically takes place, some will start in December, but most of it's going to be January through March. A few into April. I think the latest I've ever seen is like April 20th or April 15th or so. And that's because like they got off the wait list essentially for the interview. People had turned them down, that kind of thing. So interview season could last really long. So that kind of goes hand in hand too with time commitment is, your first applications for BSMD are going to be due in November, and most of your BSMD interviews are going to be due in November, with some in December and a few in January and a few in February. But, most of them are going to be in that time period of, before the new year, but you won't be interviewing until January, February, March. So it is a really, really long process. And of course you probably started it in June, writing the essays in June. You started building your application like, years ago. And so, will definitely be like a ton of work and a ton of commitment that you've put into it at this point. Now, of course, like traditional applications, they do take a lot of time commitment and a lot of effort and a lot of energy, especially for like our uber competitive ones. But I would say BSMD definitely does add another wrinkle, just because you're usually applying to those competitive schools on top of the BSMD applications as well. And I really can't stress this enough, but having a strong SAT score or a good rank isn't enough. Resume is key. Essays are key. What schools you choose to apply to are really key too. And so there are a lot of elements that you'll have to be considering throughout this process to make sure ultimately that you have all the elements you need to stand out throughout this process. And so we'll talk a lot about that, in future webinars as well, kind of about how to make sure that you do have all those pieces and all those different elements to make sure that you are standing out through the crowd. But yeah, it's not enough just to have the 1560 on the SAT and a 4.0 GPA, because a lot of other kids will be just like that too. Okay. So now I got some questions sent to me beforehand. I know we're kind of winding down. So I'll answer a few of the ones that got sent to me before and any other ones that I kind of see. And if you want, you can send them to us in the chat or email us, and we'll definitely be doing like another webinar too, kind of like an Ask Me Anything type webinar that you can, ask us any questions there too. But some of the questions that got sent to me beforehand is which BSMD programs also accept international students. And so for this one, it is a little tricky, about which ones do accept international students. There are very few. I believe there's 10 to 15, and it does vary if you've got a green card, if you have international students. But I believe, for example, Brown accepts international students, Case accepts international students, and I believe the SUNY upstate schools accept international students. Now, granted, this information could change from year to year, so this is not the word of the law by any means. But I would reach out to the individual schools and ask them, if they accept international students. I know for the New Jersey medical school students or medical school, feeder schools, how their kind of works is you just have to be a citizen by the time you start medical school. So if you're kind of in the process and you're well on your way, it's obviously still a risk because I know COVID has really slowed down the citizenship process. But if that's something that's kind of would potentially work for you, that could definitely be an option too. Okay, another question that got sent to me was, what would be considered a good rank for the BSMD program? I mean, the ideal would be in the top 10%. Some BSMD programs do want you to be in the top 10%. The good news is you don't have to be in the top 5 or 1% or anything like that. I would say it's more important to be taking a rigorous course load and performing well. That doesn't mean that you have to have a 4.0 by any means. I definitely have worked with kids who've gotten many Bs, have had GPAs in a 3.6 range or so, and higher. I would say kind of our ideal spot would be in the 3.8 range or higher. But that being said, 3.7, 3.6, 3.5, you can definitely find a home for yourself. It depends too on what BSMD program you want to get into. Some of the more competitive ones, you have to be better. To be honest, you do have to be higher ranked. But it is always possible to get accepted to a BSMD or DO program with a 3.5 or 3.6. As long as you have a lot of those other pieces too, the resume and SAT, ACT score, things like that. And now that being said too, now that I'm thinking about it, I did have a girl last year who had one bad semester. She had gotten a concussion, and it really did derail her. And I think it was right when COVID happened too. And so it was virtual learning. She couldn't be looking at screens for long term, and she was learning virtually. So it was really hard for her to kind of make it to manage it. And so that was one thing we did talk about in her additional information section on the Common App was about why this happened and, why her grades did take a dip. It didn't affect her. She got to 3 or 4 BSMD programs. And so it is a possibility, even with a lower GPA. And honestly, I don't think her GPA was that low. I wish I remember what it was off the top of my head, but I don't think it was any lower than 3.7. It could have been a 3.8 even, but it's okay. At the end of the day, she did have good grades and a lot of other good elements. Her resume was really awesome, really unique, and that really did help her too, I think. Okay. Another question that got sent to me, does it help to get CPR first aid certified as a high schooler? It doesn't hurt. But I mean, ideally it'd be nice if you could find a way to use those skills, elsewhere. It's something that whenever we're working with medical school students or even high school students, it's all well and good to get, EMT certified, EMS certified, but you want to be ultimately finding a way to practice those skills. Same thing with I want to say if you are fluent in Spanish or you've taken all the way through AP Spanish, and you want to find ways to almost practice those skills. So you want to be working in an environment, maybe where you're with Spanish speakers or you're working with able to showcase your skills essentially in a way. You're tutoring in Spanish. It's the same thing for first aid, CPR, those types of things. Try and figure out a way you can kind of showcase those skills too. Okay, I'm gonna do one more question. Um, what do I do if I'm a rising junior and a very well-rounded student? I mean, honestly, that sounds like a good problem to have. I would say there's kind of two philosophies in college admissions, like what kids are doing when they're building their resume, super pointy, and then more well-rounded, which it sounds like you are. So super pointy or spiky, I've also heard it been called, is whenever all of your activities are kind of related to each other. So if we remember about that girl who had her sister had autism and like all her activities were related to kind of special needs awareness, she was pointy. Everything, out of her activity list, you get 10 activities on the Common App. I think like 6 or 7 of them were all related to like special needs awareness. And honestly, that's because we clumped together several of them. She was very, very heavily involved in that like kind of world, pointy. And so she was successful. Like she's gotten into a lot of really great schools already. But the other kind of student I would say is like more like the well-rounded student who's, maybe a captain of the badminton team and who's done research and who's done like food drives and stuff like that, but doesn't really have one interest. Everything's, they like computer science, they like, volunteering at the hospital. They've done some research that they've enjoyed. So, like nothing is necessarily standing out. That could be okay too, but I would say you want to not have like just surface level things. You want to try and go a little bit deeper. Think about how you can add a couple new elements to your activities. If you've bounced around too much in activities, like, it's not that necessarily, as I mentioned before, the end of the world. If you quit an activity, you don't want to keep doing things just to do them. We want to do activities that we get joy out of. But, we do want to ultimately be able to showcase like, leadership and showcase passion for things. And so that's why you do want to have some longer term activities. So if you are a well-rounded student that you think does have, some passions and some leadership and some, deep involvement in some activities, even if it's 3 or 4, that's okay too. You just want to make sure that you are more than just a member in every single club. You can't be a leader in every single club because that's impossible. But you want to have started something. You wanted to have leadership, even if it's like in a smaller role, that's okay. But we want to be able to show initiative. So in short, like, being a well-rounded student's okay, but maybe over the summer, what you could think about is like, how you could add another layer to an activity. If you've done a lot with robotics, like, is there something more you could be doing with robotics? Could you be starting a robotics, tutoring kind of club at a middle school or something like that? Same thing for like debate. You could go tutor a debate or be a debate coach or something like that. There's, a lot of different things you could think about that could allow you to maybe add one layer to an activity. If you're a junior, like at this point, there's not a ton of time, but there's still time to use over your summer really wisely. You still have, whatever it is, 6 months before your early action or BSMD applications are due. But then, you'll have a lot more time for like your regular decision in January. So there's still a ton of time if you act now at the end of the day. And I think overall that would be like, if I could leave one bit of advice for you is, if you're a freshman, if you're a junior, a sophomore, it doesn't matter what age you are, start investing your time now. Start building your resume, start working on your college applications, or thinking about your college applications or colleges that you want to apply to. Start with these elements that you need to really build a strong application. It's definitely not too late to start. It will be too late to start at some point, but you still do have time now, especially if you start acting, if not today, this week. Okay, well, I think that's all the time I have for y'all today. If you have any other questions, feel free to email them. You can either email me at, Lindsay@moonprep.com. You can see my email down below. Or you can visit to schedule like a free consultation call to figure out a little bit more about our services, how we can help, and guide you throughout this process. But essentially, that email or that website will be www.moonprep.com/contact. All right. Well, thanks everyone so much, and I'll talk to everyone soon.